Judge Malcolm Price's hands were pulled behind his back as Officer Roy Baker shoved him against the cold pavement. His son, Isaiah, sat frozen in the car, tears streaming down his face. "Stay calm, son. Everything will be fine," Malcolm said firmly, even as Baker pressed a knee into his back. The hot Atlanta sun beat down, but the shame of the moment burned hotter. Officer Baker's voice cut through the air. "Found something here," he announced, holding up a small bag of powder. Malcolm stayed silent. He knew the bag wasn't his, and he knew what was happening. Still, he didn't resist. He had a plan. The cameras hidden in his car had captured everything. Isaiah's voice finally broke through. "He didn't do anything. Please, let him go." Baker smirked. "Keep quiet, kid," he snapped before shoving Malcolm into the backseat of the police cruiser. Isaiah's heart raced as he watched his father disappear, his own helplessness weighing heavy in the air. It had started as a peaceful Tuesday. Judge Malcolm Price decided to drive Isaiah to school himself instead of letting him take the bus. They enjoyed mornings like this, talking about Isaiah's dreams of becoming an artist and sharing laughs over breakfast. "Let's make it a good day, son," Malcolm had said as they left their home in a quiet Atlanta neighborhood. The streets were busy but familiar. Malcolm loved Atlanta. Despite its problems, it was his city, and he was proud to serve its people. As they stopped at a red light, he glanced at Isaiah, who was scrolling through his phone. Life felt normal. But everything changed when the flashing blue and red lights appeared in the rearview mirror. Malcolm sighed, pulling over to the side of the road. "It's probably nothing," he reassured Isaiah. But the moment Baker stepped out of the patrol car, Malcolm could sense trouble. The officer's smirk, his aggressive tone, it all screamed of bad intentions. Malcolm's instincts, sharpened by years of experience in court, told him this wasn't going to be just another routine stop. Officer Baker walked around Malcolm's car with exaggerated slowness, as if putting on a show. He tapped on the rear window, motioning for Malcolm to roll it down. "License and registration," he barked. Malcolm complied without a word, his face calm but his mind racing. Baker's eyes gleamed as he inspected the documents. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Malcolm complied, glancing briefly at Isaiah. "Stay inside." "Don't worry," he said softly. As Malcolm stepped out, Baker circled to the back of the car. With a sudden move, he smashed the taillight with his flashlight. The sound made Isaiah flinch. "Looks like you've got a broken taillight," Baker said smugly. Then, reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small bag of powder and tossed it onto the ground near Malcolm's feet. "Possession of narcotics," Baker announced. Malcolm stood still, refusing to take the bait. His silence seemed to irritate Baker, who grabbed him roughly by the arm. "You're under arrest." Isaiah watched in horror as Baker led his father to the patrol car. "Dad, no," he cried out, but Malcolm's calm voice rose above the chaos. "It's going to be okay, Isaiah. Trust me." Isaiah stayed in the car, gripping his phone tightly. He didn't know what to do. Should he call his mom? Should he try to run after his dad? His hands shook as he dialed his mother's number. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "They took Dad. The police took him." His mother's voice was steady, though he could hear the worry underneath. "Where are you?" she asked. Isaiah gave her their location, and she promised to come as quickly as she could. Isaiah looked out the window, his heart pounding. He thought about all the stories he'd heard, about people being arrested for things they didn't do, about families torn apart. He thought about his dad, always so strong, now sitting in the back of a police car. "Why is this happening?" he whispered to himself. In the distance, he could still see the flashing lights of the police car driving away. For the first time in his life, Isaiah felt completely helpless. Hey everyone, if you're enjoying this story and want to hear more jaw-dropping true crime tales, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Malcolm Price sat in the back of the police cruiser, his hands cuffed behind him. The familiar hum of the engine seemed louder in the tense silence. Baker's smug voice filtered through the front seat as he radioed in the arrest, making boastful remarks about another dealer off the streets. Malcolm remained quiet, his face calm but his mind sharp. He thought about the hidden cameras in his car, capturing every moment of the encounter. He thought about Isaiah, hoping his son wasn't too scared. Most of all, he thought about the bigger picture, how this one moment could shine a light on the rot within the system he had fought to uphold. This wasn't the first time he had encountered injustice, but it was the first time it had been so personal. Baker glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "You're awfully quiet for someone about to spend a long time behind bars," he sneered. Malcolm met his gaze, unflinching. "Sometimes silence speaks louder than words," he replied evenly. Baker scoffed, shaking his head, oblivious to the trap Malcolm had set. Back at the scene, Isaiah sat anxiously in the car, staring at the spot where his father had been arrested. When his mother, Vanessa Price, arrived, her face was a mixture of worry and determination. She embraced Isaiah tightly before stepping back to assess the situation. "What happened?" she asked, her voice firm. Isaiah recounted the events, his words tumbling out in a rush. "The officer smashed the taillight, Mom. He put drugs on the ground and said they were Dad's." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "He planned this," she said, her voice low. "But your father is smarter than him." She quickly called a family friend who was a lawyer, explaining the situation and asking for advice. "We'll fight this," she told Isaiah, her voice steady. "Your dad knows what he's doing. And so do we." As she drove Isaiah home, Vanessa reassured him. "Your dad has always believed in justice, Isaiah. He won't let this go. And neither will I." Officer Lucas Moore sat quietly in the passenger seat of the patrol car, watching Baker gloat about the arrest. Lucas had joined the force with dreams of making a difference, of protecting people and serving his community. But what he had witnessed that day shook him to his core. He had seen Baker smash the tail light. He had seen the planted bag of powder. And he had seen the dignity with which Malcolm Price handled the situation, even as he was humiliated in front of his son. "Good work today, kid," Baker said, clapping Lucas on the shoulder. "Stick with me, and you'll learn how to get results." Lucas forced a nod, his stomach churning. He wanted to speak up, to tell Baker that what he had done was wrong. But fear held him back, fear of losing his job, of being ostracized by his colleagues. He had heard stories of officers who crossed the wrong people and ended up out of the force, or worse. As they returned to the precinct, Lucas couldn't shake the image of Malcolm Price's calm, unyielding gaze. Something had to change, and deep down, Lucas knew he had a role to play in making it happen. Judge Malcolm Price sat in a holding cell, surrounded by the stark gray walls and the distant murmurs of other detainees. His crisp suit now wrinkled, and his tie loosened, Malcolm still carried an air of dignity that set him apart. He observed his surroundings with a calm, calculating demeanor, knowing that his arrest was a pivotal moment, not just for him, but for something much bigger. A guard approached the cell. "Judge Price," he said with a hint of hesitation, as the realization of Malcolm's identity had started to spread among the precinct staff. Malcolm didn't respond. He merely gave a measured nod, his mind focused on what was to come. In the adjoining room, Baker was writing up the report, embellishing details to justify the arrest. The suspect was evasive, Baker lied as he typed, and the narcotics were found in plain view near the driver's seat. He felt invincible, confident that this was just another easy win to add to his record. Meanwhile, Lucas Moore sat in the corner of the precinct, his thoughts racing. He replayed the scene over and over in his mind, the smashed taillight, the planted evidence, and the quiet strength of the men now sitting in the cell. Lucas had seen enough. He knew this wasn't justice. While Malcolm sat in silence, Vanessa Price worked tirelessly from home. She contacted trusted colleagues, friends, and allies within the legal system. Among them was Police Chief Henry Carter, a seasoned and fair leader who had worked with Malcolm on several community initiatives. "I suspected something was off with Baker," Chief Carter admitted when Vanessa explained the situation. "But I didn't have enough evidence. If Malcolm's car cameras captured what you say, this could change everything." Vanessa shared the car's live feed data with the chief, who promised to act swiftly. "Keep this under wraps for now," Carter said. "If Baker realizes the walls are closing in, he'll do everything he can to cover his tracks." Back at the precinct, Malcolm quietly observed the officers as they moved about. He caught glimpses of Lucas Moore, the young officer who seemed out of place among the hardened veterans like Baker. Lucas's body language spoke volumes, hesitation, doubt, and a clear discomfort with the situation. Malcolm decided to break the silence. When Lucas passed by the cell, Malcolm said in a steady voice, "Son, you know what's right. It's never too late to do it." Lucas stopped in his tracks, but after a moment's pause, he walked away, his head hung low. Unbeknownst to Baker, the stage was being set for his undoing. Malcolm's cameras had captured everything, and with Chief Carter now in the loop, the truth was on the verge of breaking through. The next day, Officer Baker strutted into the precinct, his confidence unshaken. He exchanged jokes with a few officers, boasting about his big bust from the day before. "High-profile guy too," he said with a grin, though he intentionally left out Malcolm's identity. Lucas Moore sat at his desk, sipping cold coffee, unable to shake the weight of guilt pressing on him. Baker's carefree attitude made Lucas's stomach churn. How could someone so blatantly corrupt act as if he had done nothing wrong? Lucas looked over at Baker and wondered if he had the courage to take a stand. Meanwhile, Police Chief Carter had quietly gathered evidence overnight, reviewing the footage Vanessa Price had shared. The judge's car cameras had captured every detail of Baker's actions, smashing the taillight, planting the evidence, and the rough arrest. It was irrefutable proof. Carter called Lucas into his office. "Close the door," he said. Lucas obeyed, his heart racing. "I've seen the footage from Judge Price's car," Carter began, his tone grave. "I need to know if there's anything else you've seen or heard that could help this case." Lucas hesitated. Speaking out could mean the end of his career, or worse. But the image of Malcolm Price, calm and resolute even in handcuffs, lingered in his mind. Taking a deep breath, Lucas nodded. "I saw everything, Chief. The taillight, the drugs, the way Baker handled it all. It wasn't right." Carter studied the young officer for a moment before nodding. "You've done the right thing. Now, let's make this right." Later that morning, Baker was assigned to escort a witness to the courthouse for a hearing. He strolled into the grand building, his usual arrogance on full display. As he entered the courtroom, he froze. Judge Malcolm Price was sitting on the bench in his full judicial robe, his presence commanding and calm. For a moment, Baker didn't understand. Was this some kind of mistake? Wasn't the judge supposed to be in a holding cell? "Officer Baker," Malcolm said, his voice echoing in the courtroom. "It seems we meet again." Baker's face turned pale as whispers spread through the room. Malcolm gestured toward the bailiff, who wheeled in a television on a stand. "Let's review the events of yesterday, shall we?" he said. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as footage from Malcolm's car cameras played on the screen. The video showed everything, the smashed taillight, the planted drugs, and Baker's abusive behavior. When the clip ended, Malcolm's gaze locked onto Baker. "You claimed your body camera malfunctioned," Malcolm said, his voice steady. "But as you can see, the truth has a way of coming to light." Baker stammered, his bravado crumbling. Chief Carter, who had been waiting in the back of the courtroom, stepped forward. "Roy Baker, you're under arrest," Carter announced. "For falsifying evidence, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice." The courtroom erupted in gasps as Baker was handcuffed. Lucas watched from the gallery, his heart pounding. Justice was being served, and he had played a part in it. As Baker was led out, Malcolm turned to the room. "This is not just about one officer," he said. "This is about a system that must change. And it will." News of Officer Baker's arrest spread like wildfire across Atlanta. Within hours, local news stations picked up the story, replaying the footage of Malcolm Price's arrest alongside the dramatic courtroom confrontation. Social media buzzed with outrage, support, and calls for justice. For many in the community, the incident confirmed what they had long suspected. That corruption ran deep within the police force. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs that read, "Justice for all," "End police corruption," and "No more dirty cops." The energy was palpable, a mixture of anger, determination, and hope. At home, Isaiah watched the news with his mother. He felt a swell of pride seeing his father's calm, dignified face on the screen. "Dad really did it," he said softly. Vanessa nodded, her eyes filled with both relief and determination. "And it's just the beginning," she replied. Judge Price, however, remained focused. While grateful for the public support, he knew the road ahead would be long. The corruption exposed by Baker's actions was likely just the tip of the iceberg, and dismantling such a system would require more than one arrest. That evening, Malcolm met with Police Chief Carter and a few trusted officials in his chambers. "This isn't about one bad officer," Malcolm said. "If we want to rebuild trust in the police, we need to clean house." Carter agreed. "We've already started an internal investigation. Baker's arrest has made others uneasy. We're finding cracks in the shield." Malcolm leaned forward, his tone resolute. "Then let's widen those cracks. We need to root out everyone complicit in the system, no matter how high it goes." The days following Baker's arrest were a whirlwind for Lucas Moore. His decision to come forward had made him a key figure in the ongoing investigation. At first, he was nervous, unsure how his colleagues would react. But as the days passed, he began to feel something he hadn't felt since joining the force, a sense of purpose. Lucas met with the department's internal affairs team, detailing everything he had witnessed during his time working with Baker. He recounted not just the events of Malcolm's arrest but other incidents, minor infractions, whispered threats, and unspoken rules that kept officers like Baker untouchable. "You're doing the right thing," one of the investigators assured him. "This takes courage." But not everyone saw it that way. In the precinct, Lucas faced cold stares and whispered conversations. Some officers openly accused him of betrayal. "You're no better than a snitch," one of them sneered. Lucas didn't let it deter him. He reminded himself of Malcolm's words in the courtroom, of the dignity with which the judge had faced injustice. Lucas wanted to be part of the solution, not the problem. One evening, as he walked to his car, he found a note taped to the windshield. In bold, angry letters, it read, "Traitor." Lucas crumpled the paper in his fist, his resolve hardening. "They can call me what they want," he muttered to himself. "I know I'm doing what's right." The next day, Lucas met with Chief Carter and Judge Price. Together, they discussed how to implement lasting reforms. Lucas left the meeting feeling hopeful for the first time in weeks. For the first time, he felt like he was truly making a difference. As the internal investigation gained momentum, shocking revelations began to surface. Officer Baker's arrest had opened a floodgate of whistleblowers and complaints. Records showed that Baker wasn't acting alone. Several officers in the precinct had collaborated with him, either by planting evidence, falsifying reports, or turning a blind eye to his actions. Chief Carter, Judge Price, and the internal affairs team worked tirelessly to review decades of misconduct. Files were pulled, body cam footage was scrutinized, and witness testimonies were collected. Every piece of evidence pointed to a systemic problem that had been allowed to fester for years. One report stood out, a pattern of arrests disproportionately targeting Black and Latino residents in specific neighborhoods. Many of these cases, when re-examined, had glaring inconsistencies. Innocent lives had been derailed by wrongful convictions. "This isn't just about corruption," Malcolm said during a late-night meeting with Carter. "This is about systemic racism. These practices didn't start with Baker, and they won't end with him unless we dig deeper." Carter nodded solemnly. "We need to clean up this department from the inside out. It won't be easy, but I'm committed to making it happen." The investigation soon led to several high-ranking officers, including a lieutenant who had been covering for Baker's misconduct. Warrants were issued, and arrests were made. The sight of officers being led out of the precinct in handcuffs sent a powerful message: no one was above the law. The media dubbed it the reckoning in Atlanta. Community leaders, activists, and citizens began calling for widespread reforms, including independent oversight of the police department and better training for officers. For Malcolm, the progress was encouraging, but he knew the fight was far from over. The corruption ran deep, and it would take more than arrests to heal the damage done. For Isaiah, the past weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions. Seeing his father humiliated and arrested had been terrifying, but watching him fight back with integrity had filled Isaiah with pride. Now, he felt a growing urge to share his perspective. One day, at his mother's encouragement, Isaiah agreed to speak at a community rally. Standing on the makeshift stage in a park filled with protesters, he clutched the microphone tightly, his heart pounding. "My name is Isaiah Price," he began, his voice trembling but strong. "I'm the son of Judge Malcolm Price. And I want to tell you what happened to my dad." Isaiah recounted the arrest, describing how his father had been dragged out of the car and humiliated in front of him. He talked about the fear he felt that day, the helplessness, and the anger. But he also spoke about the courage his father showed and the hope he inspired. "My dad taught me to believe in justice," Isaiah said, his voice steady now. "And even when he was treated unfairly, he didn't give up. He fought back the right way, with truth and dignity. That's the kind of man he is. And that's the kind of man I want to be." The crowd erupted in applause, some people wiping tears from their eyes. For many, Isaiah's words were a reminder of why they were fighting: for families, for fairness, for a better future. After the rally, strangers approached Isaiah to thank him for sharing his story. One man, a father himself, said, "Your dad's bravery gives me hope. And so do you." Isaiah walked away from the rally feeling lighter. For the first time since the ordeal began, he felt like he was turning his pain into something meaningful. As news of the rally and Isaiah's speech spread, the city of Atlanta found itself at a crossroads. The systemic corruption within the police department had been exposed, and the community's demand for justice grew louder. Protests, town hall meetings, and marches became common sights across the city. Malcolm Price attended several of these events, often as a speaker, but sometimes simply as a supporter. He spoke about the importance of accountability and the need to rebuild trust between the police and the community. His calm demeanor and ability to focus on solutions rather than blame made him a respected figure in the movement. Chief Carter also made public appearances, acknowledging the department's failures and outlining steps being taken to address them. "We've let this city down," Carter admitted at a press conference. "But I promise you, this is the beginning of a new era. Corruption will no longer have a place in Atlanta's police force." The department announced several reforms, including mandatory body cameras for all officers, independent oversight boards, and improved bias training. Carter also initiated a recruitment campaign aimed at diversifying the police force, ensuring it better represented the communities it served. Meanwhile, community leaders worked to provide support for those who had been wrongfully arrested or convicted. Legal aid organizations teamed up with Malcolm and other advocates to review cases linked to Baker and his network. Dozens of people were exonerated, their lives given a chance to start anew. Through all of this, Isaiah remained a beacon of hope for the younger generation. His story resonated with kids his age, inspiring them to stand up for what was right. "Justice doesn't just belong in courtrooms," he told a group of students at a school assembly. "It belongs in our lives, in our choices, and in our hearts." Atlanta was far from healed, but for the first time in years, its people felt united. They were determined to make their city a place where justice wasn't just a word but a way of life. Officer Lucas Moore sat in the back of the precinct's meeting room, listening as Chief Carter addressed the department. The chief spoke about the ongoing investigation, the arrests of corrupt officers, and the reforms being implemented. Lucas felt a mix of relief and apprehension. He had spent weeks working closely with internal affairs, providing detailed accounts of Baker's misconduct. His testimony had been instrumental in uncovering the network of corruption. But Lucas knew that speaking out had made him a target among some of his colleagues. After the meeting, a few officers approached Lucas. "Tough spot you're in, huh?" one said with a smirk. "Not everyone's happy with the way you've been handling things." Lucas felt the sting of their words but stood his ground. "I'm doing what's right," he replied firmly. "If that bothers some people, then maybe they're part of the problem." To his surprise, a fellow rookie approached him later. "You did the right thing, Lucas," she said quietly. "A lot of us saw what Baker was doing, but we were too scared to speak up. You gave us courage." Lucas's heart lifted. He had feared isolation, but her words reminded him that change often started with one person willing to take a stand. At the next public meeting, Lucas decided to share his story. "I joined this force to protect and serve," he told the crowd. "But what I saw wasn't protection, it was abuse. And I couldn't stay silent anymore. I chose to speak up because silence allows injustice to grow." The room erupted in applause, and Lucas felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since joining the force. He wasn't just a cop anymore, he was part of the solution. The trial of Officer Roy Baker became a pivotal moment for Atlanta. Courtrooms were packed, reporters flooded the city, and residents watched closely as the case unfolded. Baker faced charges of falsifying evidence, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice. For many, the trial symbolized more than just Baker's actions, it was a reckoning for a system that had failed them for far too long. Malcolm Price sat in the gallery, watching as the prosecution presented damning evidence. The footage from Malcolm's car cameras was the centerpiece. It showed Baker smashing the taillight, planting the drugs, and dragging Malcolm to the ground. Baker's defense attempted to argue that his body camera malfunctioned and that he had been acting on suspicion. But the evidence was irrefutable. Testimonies from Lucas Moore and other officers further exposed the extent of Baker's corruption. When Malcolm was called to the stand, he spoke with calm authority. "This isn't just about me," he said. "This is about a culture of misconduct that has gone unchecked. But today, we have the chance to change that." The jury deliberated for only a few hours before delivering their verdict, guilty on all charges. Baker was sentenced to prison, and the courtroom erupted in applause. Malcolm felt a sense of closure, but he knew this was just one step in a much larger fight. With Baker behind bars and multiple other officers under investigation, the Atlanta Police Department faced the monumental task of rebuilding public trust. Chief Carter worked tirelessly to implement reforms, but the scars of corruption were deep. Community leaders partnered with the department to establish new initiatives, including civilian oversight committees and youth outreach programs. Malcolm Price became a key advisor in these efforts, helping to bridge the gap between the police and the community. Lucas Moore was promoted to a leadership role within a newly formed integrity unit. His experience speaking out against Baker made him a respected figure among younger officers. He began mentoring recruits, teaching them the importance of integrity and accountability. Isaiah, inspired by his father's courage, started an art project aimed at telling the stories of those impacted by police corruption. His murals, painted on walls across the city, became symbols of hope and resilience. The city wasn't perfect, but change was visible. For the first time in years, people felt that their voices mattered. Years later, Malcolm Price looked out of his office window at a city transformed. Atlanta still had its struggles, but it was no longer defined by the corruption that had once plagued it. Malcolm's case had set a precedent, sparking nationwide conversations about police reform. Cities across the country began adopting similar measures, inspired by Atlanta's progress. Isaiah had grown into a confident young man, his artwork gaining recognition beyond Atlanta. His murals told stories of pain and healing, of injustice and hope. "You've inspired me, Dad," he said one evening. "You taught me that standing up for what's right can change the world." Malcolm smiled, pride swelling in his chest. He had fought not just for himself, but for his son, his community, and the generations to come. Atlanta's journey was far from over, but the legacy of Malcolm Price, Isaiah, and those who stood for justice would forever be a part of its story. Justice wasn't just served, it had sparked a movement. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel.